Dr. Hindson, we were talking about the Old Testament, and you're an expert in that. And one of the things that as I interact with people, they tell me, listen, I get what you're saying, that there's historical places, historical people. I get what you're talking about, this big worldview stuff. But here's the thing. I read the Old Testament, and there's crazy stuff happening. Stuff that's very difficult for me to believe, these miracles, these big miracles. What do we say to that? How do we respond as Christians if somebody says that to us?
You have a whole variety of those. You have individual miracles where somebody like Elijah calls down fire on somebody, where he prays that it won't rain for 3.5 years, and the Bible says it didn't. Then you have the huge issues like parting of the Red Sea or parting the waters of the Jordan River. Are there some naturalistic factors that impacted some of that? To what degree did God use nature to accomplish some of those things that are still miraculous, because they're miracles of timing and miracles of the consequence of how it impacted people? But then you have other miracles where somebody's raised from the dead, etc. And that raises then the bigger question of, is there a real, living, personal, divine being, God, who can intervene into the natural world and into the human process and do the unbelievable, the unexplainable, the incredible? And not only is that true in the Old Testament, then is that true in the miracles of Jesus in the New Testament? Giving sight to the blind. Jesus does it. Isaiah said the Messiah would give sight to the blind. There are no miracles of giving sight to the blind in the Old Testament, interestingly. And when a blind person has never seen, though, that part of the brain hasn't even been developed yet to be able to focus, and yet in Jesus' miracles, they immediately can see. The lame man who's never walked his entire life can get up and walk. I was once in the hospital for 100 days. I had to learn to walk all over again. That either challenges you to say, this was as radical a miracle as it claims to be, or it never really happened at all. But when you have eyewitnesses that are involved in most of these miracles, there are plenty of people that could have contradicted that to say, no, that really didn't happen. Like with Jesus feeding of the 5,000 and then feeding of the 4,000. Why would Mark include both in his gospel, knowing they're two totally different accounts with different numbers of fish, different responses, and yet it's obvious he was convinced both had taken place.
So one of the things I hear you saying, it's a worldview type issue. If you believe in God, particularly the God of Israel, the God who resurrected Jesus from the grave, then certainly you could believe in all the other stuff. But if you don't believe in God, well then
you're not going to believe in any of that. You're going to tend to say, well, I don't think there could ever be a miracle anywhere. Then you'd have to try to explain away every miraculous claim that has ever been made throughout history, in or out of the Bible.
And there's books that have even recently come out. Craig Keener's 2-volume work on miracles, which is just an overload of these accounts. And even if you say, well, you discount a few here, discount a few here,
it's hard to explain them all away.
That's right.
It's like being hit with 1,000 ping pong balls all at once. The evidence just keeps coming and coming and coming until after a while it's pretty hard to explain all of them away. Now there are some with challenges. The long day miracle in the book of Joshua. How in the world did the sun not set for nearly 20 some hours or whatever? Or did God bend and refract the light? Did it appear to stay light? Did the earth slow down in its rotation? There are a lot of things the Bible doesn't explain. It only explains to us the result or the impact of the miracle, and then what happened in the lives of the people who participated in it.
And I find oftentimes it's a matter of burden of proof. Whereas if you have a general trust for the Bible, for instance, in my field, eyewitness accounts of the Gospels, you have a general trust, you learn to trust the Gospels, then the burden of proof is that, I don't have to prove everything historically. But I think sometimes for the skeptic, and I wonder, I imagine this plays out in the Old Testament too, then it's like, you've got to prove everything, if you want to for us to take it seriously. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, and it's impossible to prove everything. But for example, take the story of David and Goliath. I love this story. David is a 17-year-old teenager, the equivalent of a senior in high school at Bethlehem High, we'll say. He goes out and kills a 9-foot tall giant. He's not a 30-foot tall Jack and the Beanstalk kind of a giant. He's very real, very believable, and very big. David's not a little boy, so some people misunderstand the story to start with. It's important to get the biblical story in its proper context. He's from the city of Gath. Well, there really was a Gath. Archaeologists have found the place, excavated it, and interestingly, they found a broken piece of a plate with Goliath's name on it. Now, it doesn't prove it was his plate, but it shows that that was a common name used by Philistines in the city of Gath, and for all we know, it may have been Goliath's plate. We have an inscription with David's name on it for the house of David, found at Tel Dan in northern Israel. So that tells me there really was a David, there probably really was a Goliath, and this account is read by all the people of Israel. If it wasn't true, there would have been plenty of soldiers in that valley that day to say, hey, wait a minute, what did you put that in there for? That never happened.
Yeah, and so on a popular level, proof gets kind of thrown around, like prove it. And at a higher level, at an academic level, when we're talking about history, we're using different categories as maybe it's not 2 + 2 = 4, but we're asking questions such as what we know about the environment and the context. Does this story fit well within what we know? And I think over and over we see that again for the New Testament and the Old Testament.
It fits in its culture.
Yeah.
When Joseph's in Egypt, you have all kinds of Egyptian references. It's obvious that was written in that context. When they're in Canaan, it's a Canaanite context. When they're in Babylon, it's a Babylonian context. Names of trees and bushes and flowers always fit the context historically, geographically, telling us this seems like it was written in the environment out of which it claims to come. Therefore, you have to take the claim a lot more seriously than you would say the Gnostic Gospels, where there aren't any place names, and it's obvious the author has no clue where these places are.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like some kind of mythical account when you come to the biblical Gospels or the Old Testament. It seems that, as you said, these things are happening in real places in a real historical context. And they're recorded because they were miraculous, oftentimes. And so it was a special event.
On the people who saw
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So oftentimes when you hear these popular level attacks, dig deeper. There's scholars here at Liberty. There's scholars, evangelical scholars, conservative scholars doing work in these fields. What maybe would be some books, some research that you could point to for our listeners, our viewers?
Kenneth Kitchen's book, certainly on the reliability of the Old Testament, is a classic work. It's a massive tome. It's not easy to read, but it does deal with all those tough questions. And then you have popular books. Norm Geisler, Gleason Archer have written books on dealing with supposed errors in the Bible or discrepancies and difficulties in the Bible. People have dealt with these things for hundreds of years. There's a whole history of how one might understand some of those challenges, and very good, believable, solid answers. It's not like they're saying, close your mind down, put on blinders, and just believe it to believe it. But here's an explanation of what I think is the solution to what appears to be a conflict of interest or a problem in a particular passage. And that's the great thing about Christianity. It really tries to genuinely tackle those things because we take faith and history and fact seriously.
Yeah, we're not dividing the two. Yeah, Jesus really did rise from the grave. He really did historically, and that matters. And it also matters with how we look at the Old Testament. Because if Jesus believes this, if you really believe Jesus is Lord, then you're going to trust him. And he had a lot of confidence in the Old Testament.
He did. When he said in Luke 24, if you look at the law, the prophets, and the Psalms, what we today would call the Tanakh, a Jewish Bible, the Torah, the Nevi'im, the Ketuvim, and put that all together, he's saying, in essence, the law, the writings, and the Psalms are all about me. That's a pretty strong statement to make. Either he's right or he's not right. He's either claiming that he's the fulfillment of those prophecies, those pictures, those types, those illustrations that we have in the Old Testament, or he doesn't know what he's talking about. Jesus seemed to have a great amount of confidence in the Old Testament and almost seemed to go out of his way to quote the most controversial parts of it. Referred to Noah and Jonah and a number of issues that scholars have struggled with as though they were factual and they were making a point that he was trying to make in his message.
Yeah, and so I love scholarship, and yet if a scholar bumps heads with Jesus, I'm going with Jesus.
Good thought. Always safe when you do that. Yeah.
Very good. Thanks for being with us today.